Some stories are whispered on the wind, tales of intervention from a realm beyond our own. This is one of those stories, a testament to faith forged in the crucible of terror. If you believe in miracles, or even just wonder about them, you need to hear this. And if you want to join us for more stories that explore the thin veil between our world and the next, please like and subscribe so you don't miss a single one. Part 1. The Pilot, Captain Mark Rourke. The first sign was not on the radar, but in the soul. Captain Mark Rourke, a man who trusted aluminum and physics more than he trusted most people, felt a cold, unfamiliar finger trace a line down his spine. He was at 36,000 feet, the sky a boundless deep purple ahead of his Airbus A330, the endless sprawl of the Atlantic Ocean, a featureless black void below. The control panel glowed with a soft, greenish luminescence, a symphony of data and stability. Beside him, First Officer Ben Carter hummed softly, running through the pre-descent checklist for their arrival into Boston. It was Flight 477, a routine red-eye from London, carrying 247 souls. It was supposed to be easy, but that cold finger on his spine, a sensation he hadn't felt since his first solo engine failure 20 years ago, whispered that easy was a concept for the ground. Mark Rourke was, by every metric, a master of his domain. His hands, resting lightly on the yoke, were steady. His salt and pepper hair was cropped close in a practical military style, a holdover from his Air Force days. He believed in procedure, in checklists, in the immutable laws of aerodynamics. His faith was in the machine, in the thousands of hours of engineering that kept them aloft. His personal life, however, was a different kind of system, one that had recently suffered a catastrophic failure of its own. A year ago, his wife Sarah had been diagnosed with a rare, aggressive ovarian cancer. The treatments were brutal, a relentless assault that left her frail and faded. Mark, the man who could command 250,000 pounds of machinery through the worst turbulence, felt utterly helpless, watching the woman he loved diminish. He'd buried his fear in work, in the sterile, predictable environment of the cockpit, flying more hours than required, escaping the suffocating silence of a hospital room or their too-quiet house. He'd stopped praying years ago, deciding that if God was there, he was a distant air traffic controller, too busy with grander designs to bother with one man's personal despair. The first jolt was subtle, a deep guttural shudder that ran through the airframe, more felt than heard. Ben stopped humming. Both pilots' eyes snapped to the engine indicators. The Rolls-Royce Trent 700 engines were humming along, their parameters nominal. "Clear air turbulence," Ben suggested, though his tone was doubtful. The weather radar, just moments ago, had been clear. "Maybe," Mark grunted, his eyes scanning the horizon. That was when he saw it, not on the screen in front of him, but out in the world. A distant, silent flicker of light, deep within a bank of cloud that shouldn't have been there. It was a faint, phosphorescent pulse, like a dying star. He felt that cold finger again, now a fist clenching in his gut. "Ben, run a full radar sweep, maximum range." Ben's fingers danced across the console. The screen fizzled, repainted, and then displayed it. A massive, blooming wall of red and magenta, a cancerous growth stretching across their path. It hadn't been there 15 minutes ago. It was a supercell, born with a violent, meteorological suddenness, and it was directly between them and the coast. "Holy," Ben breathed. "That's not possible. It came out of nowhere." "Nothing comes from nowhere," Mark said, his voice tight. He keyed the intercom, his professional calm a mask over the rising dread. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We're anticipating some weather ahead. It looks a bit bumpy, so I'm going to ask you to please return to your seats and ensure your seatbelts are securely fastened. Flight attendants, please prepare the cabin." He began the standard procedures, requesting a deviation from air traffic control. The response was crackled with static. 77. Deviation not possible. Traffic. Hold present heading. The voice broke up, swallowed by the mounting interference. The first drop of rain hit the windshield. It wasn't a drop, it was an explosive splat, like a water balloon, then another, and then the sky fell. The plane was enveloped in a furious, roaring blackness. The turbulence was no longer subtle. It was a violent, shaking madness. The aircraft dropped suddenly, a sickening elevator plunge that stole the breath from their lungs. Oxygen masks swung down in the cockpit. Over the screaming of the wind and the groaning of the airframe, a new sound emerged. A deep, rhythmic, grinding bang from the right side of the aircraft. "Engine 2! Engine 2!" Ben yelled, his face pale in the strobe light of the lightning that now flashed constantly, illuminating the cockpit in terrifying, stark snapshots. Mark's hands were a blur, working the controls, following the memory items for engine severe damage. The engine parameters on the screen for Engine 2 spiraled into red, then went blank. It had flamed out. The plane yawed violently to the right. Mark fought the yoke, muscles straining. Before he could even process it, a deafening explosion rocked the left side of the plane. A fireball, horrifyingly visible in the pitch black, erupted from Engine 1 and was instantly whipped away by the hurricane-force winds. The master warning system blared a cacophony of alarms. Engine failure, stall, stall. They had lost both engines. They were a 200-ton glider in the middle of a thunderstorm over the freezing, deadly Atlantic. The cockpit became a chamber of horrors. The only light came from the frantic, flashing warnings and the constant apocalyptic lightning. The noise was a physical assault. Mark was flying now on instinct and raw skill, but his instruments were gyrating wildly, unreliable in the extreme turbulence. They were losing altitude fast. He knew the numbers. They had minutes at best before they hit the water. A ditching at night in a storm like this was not survivable. It was a death sentence for everyone on board. "Mayday, mayday, mayday!" Ben was screaming into the radio, but it was useless. Only static answered. In that moment, the facade of the master pilot, the man of science and procedure, shattered completely. He saw Sarah's face, not as she was now, but as she had been, smiling, her head thrown back in laughter. He saw the profound sadness in her eyes the last time he'd left for a trip, a sadness he'd been too busy, too scared to address. He had run from her suffering. He had chosen the false sanctuary of the sky over the hard, holy ground of being present at her bedside. His greatest failure wasn't happening in this cockpit. It had happened over a year of quiet abandonment. A memory surfaced, unbidden, from his childhood. His Irish grandmother pulling a well-worn rosary from her apron pocket, her soft voice. "In times of trouble, Marky," she'd said, "you don't need fancy words. You just ask Our Lady for help. She's a mother, she understands." Tears, mingling with cold sweat, streamed down his face. His hands, gripping the yoke, were white-knuckled, fighting a losing battle. He was out of procedure. He was out of skill. He was out of time. He began to pray. It wasn't eloquent. It was a raw, guttural, desperate cry from the deepest, most broken part of his soul. "Remember, O most gracious Virgin Mary." He shouted the words into the chaos, each one a struggle. "That never was it known that anyone who fled to thy protection, implored thy help, or sought thy intercession, was left unaided." A violent updraft slammed the plane, tossing it like a leaf. Ben was thrown against his shoulder harness, groaning. "Inspired by this confidence, I fly unto thee, O Virgin of Virgins, my mother. To thee do I come, before thee I stand, sinful and sorrowful." He thought of Sarah. He offered his own life, his own death, but begged for the lives of his passengers, for his crew, for his friend beside him. "O Mother of the Word incarnate, despise not my petitions, but in thy mercy hear and answer me. Amen." As he uttered the final word, the Memorare, a prayer he hadn't recited in 40 years. Something happened, not outside the plane, but inside him. A profound, impossible calm settled over his heart. The terror was still there, the storm still raged, but at his core was a stillness, a pinpoint of light in the blackness. He knew, with a certainty that defied all logic, that he was not alone. He looked out the windshield into the maelstrom, and that's when he saw her. The storm was still a raging beast, the plane still falling, but in the heart of the black clouds, a figure began to form. It was not a face, not yet, but a presence, a silhouette of impossible peace amidst the chaos. What was it? A trick of the light, a final hallucination of a dying brain? Captain Rourke couldn't know, but the calm that held him refused to let go. His eyes remained locked on the vision, even as his hands, almost of their own accord, continued to fight for control. The fate of everyone on board now hinged on a miracle, and the miracle had just begun. Part 2. The Grandmother, Eleanor Pardo. Eleanor Pardo knew the weight of a soul. At 72, she felt it in the ache of her knees, in the slow, deliberate rhythm of her breath, and most profoundly in the small, trusting hand currently clutching hers. Her grandson, Leo, slept soundly beside her in seat 23B, his head lolled against the window, his breathing a soft, peaceful counterpoint to the building anxiety humming through the cabin. The seatbelt sign had been on for what felt like an age, and the plane had begun to buck and shudder with an increasing violence. Eleanor wasn't afraid for herself. She had long ago made her peace with God. Her fear was a specific, piercing thing. It was for the boy next to her. Leo was 8, all skinned knees and boundless curiosity about dinosaurs. He was her daughter's only child, the light of their family, and he was in her care. This trip to London had been a gift, a special journey for just the two of them. Now it felt like a terrible mistake. Eleanor's life had been a tapestry woven with threads of faith and tragedy. A native of a small village in Puerto Rico, she had grown up in the vibrant, mystical Catholicism of the island, where the veil between the earthly and the divine was tissue-thin. She had witnessed things. A cousin healed of a fever after a novena to Our Lady of Providence. A strange, sweet smell of roses that filled her mother's house on the anniversary of her father's death. She believed, utterly and completely. But her faith had been tested, cruelly, 5 years ago. Her only daughter, Maria, Leo's mother, had been killed by a drunk driver. The world had collapsed into a grey, suffocating grief. In her deepest anguish, Eleanor had felt abandoned. She had raged at God, at the Virgin, her prayers turning from pleas to accusations. How could you take a mother from her child? How could you allow this? For a long time, she went through the motions of her faith, but the heart had gone out of it. The miracles of her youth felt like stories for another person. It was Leo who had brought her back. His small, grieving heart needed her to be strong. He needed her to be the keeper of his mother's memory, and in doing so, she became the keeper of her own faith again. She taught him the prayers she'd taught Maria. She told him stories of the saints and the Virgin, not as distant figures, but as loving friends in heaven, with his mother now among them. This trip was part of that healing, a chance to make new, joyful memories. But as the plane gave another savage lurch, jolting Leo awake, Eleanor's old fear returned. The fear of a world without mercy, a God who could allow unimaginable loss. Leo's eyes were wide with confusion, then fear. Abuela? What's happening? It's just a storm, mi cielo, she said, her voice steadier than she felt, smoothing his hair. Just some bumps, like a car on a bad road. She pulled him closer, wrapping her arm around him. Then the lights flickered and died, plunging the cabin into a darkness broken only by the emergency floor lighting and the terrifying stroboscopic flash of lightning through the windows. The oxygen masks dropped with a mechanical hiss, A collective gasp, then screams, rose from the passengers. Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs. She fitted Leo's mask over his face, then her own, her fingers trembling. The plane was tilting, shuddering, falling. The roar of the wind was deafening. Over the din, a new sound erupted, a sound she knew from news reports and disaster documentaries. It was the sound of sheer, unadulterated terror from hundreds of people who know they are about to die. Leo began to cry, his small body shaking against hers. "I'm scared, Abuela. I want my mum." Those words were a dagger to Eleanor's heart. "I want my mum." In that instant, her own fear vanished, burned away by a grandmother's ferocious, protective love. She was his mother now, in every way that mattered. And a mother does not give up. A mother fights with her last breath. She pulled him tighter, burying his face in her shoulder, and she began to pray. But this was not a prayer of a petitioner to a distant queen. This was a mother speaking to another mother. This was raw, honest, and powerful. She did not pray for the storm to cease. She did not pray for the engines to restart. She prayed to the one who understood a mother's heart better than any other. She prayed to the woman who had stood at the foot of the cross and watched her own child die. "Hail, Holy Queen, Mother of Mercy!" she cried out, her voice strong and clear, cutting through the panic. Leo clung to her, listening to the familiar words. "Hail, our life, our sweetness, and our hope. To thee do we cry, poor banished children of Eve. To thee do we send up our sighs, mourning and weeping in this valley of tears." She thought of her daughter Maria and offered her grief to the mother of sorrows. She offered her own life 1,000 times over for the life of her grandson. "Turn then, most gracious advocate, thine eyes of mercy toward us, and after this our exile, show unto us the blessed fruit of thy womb, Jesus." The plane gave a terrifying shudder, and a luggage bin burst open, sending bags tumbling through the dark cabin. People screamed louder. Eleanor held Leo, her voice never wavering. She was no longer in a dying aircraft. She was at the foot of the cross, offering her greatest treasure to the one who would understand. "O clement, O loving, O sweet Virgin Mary, pray for us, O Holy Mother of God, that we may be made worthy of the promises of Christ." As she finished the Salve Regina, a prayer she had sung at countless funerals and feast days, she made one final, silent plea from the very depths of her soul. "Holy Mother, you lost your son. Do not let this boy lose his life. Take me, spare him, comfort him as you were comforted." And then she saw it. Outside the window, in the raging chaos of black cloud and lightning, a light began to form. It was not the harsh electric blue of the storm. It was a soft, golden, impossibly warm light. It coalesced, taking shape. It was the form of a woman, her head bowed, her hands outstretched in a gesture of infinite compassion and offering. Her robes seemed to be made of the clouds themselves, but they glowed with an internal, peaceful luminescence. A profound, overwhelming sense of love and protection flooded the cabin. The screams around them quieted, not out of shock, but out of awe. Leo lifted his head from her shoulder, his tears stopping. He stared out the window, his eyes wide, not with fear, but with wonder. "Abuela," he whispered, his voice filled with awe. "It's her. It's the lady from your stories." The terrifying shuddering of the plane began to lessen, not gradually, but all at once, as if a giant hand had stilled it. The deafening roar of the wind faded to a whisper. In the sudden, breathtaking silence, the only sound was the hushed, awed breaths of the passengers. The storm, moments ago a raging entity of destruction, was simply gone. But they were still a dead stick in the sky, gliding silently towards a dark ocean. The miracle had offered peace, but had it offered salvation? The silence was now filled with a new, terrifying question. Were they saved, or were they merely granted a moment of grace before the end? Part 3. The businessman, Julian Croft. Julian Croft did not believe in miracles. He believed in markets. He believed in leverage, acquisition, and the bottom line. Seated in 4A first class, he barely glanced up from his laptop as the first bumps began. The storm was an inconvenience, a temporary dip in the otherwise smooth trajectory of his life. He took a sip of his single malt scotch, annoyed at the slight tremor in the glass. The captain's calm announcement was a minor irritant, a distraction from the merger documents on his screen. This deal, the acquisition of a family-owned manufacturing company, was his masterpiece. He'd driven a hard bargain, leveraged the company's debt to the breaking point, and was poised to asset strip it, selling off the pieces for a profit that would be the talk of Wall Street. He'd done it a dozen times before. The fact that it would put 300 people out of work, people whose families had worked there for generations, was not a moral problem. It was a simple matter of economic Darwinism. The strong survived. The weak were consumed. Julian Croft was very, very strong. His phone, set to airplane mode, buzzed with a notification. A calendar reminder for tomorrow's meeting where he would formally dismantle a century-old business. He smiled. It was a good day's work. He was a man who had built an empire on a foundation of ruthless pragmatism. Sentiment was a liability. Faith was a crutch for the weak. His only prayer had ever been whispered into a Bloomberg terminal, and his only God was the relentless, upward-trending line of his net worth. The first real jolt made his laptop slam shut. He cursed, grabbing his scotch before it spilled. The second jolt, the massive drop, made his stomach lurch. The professional calm of the captain's voice now sounded thin, strained. Annoyance began to curdle into a sliver of unease. When the lights died and the masks dropped, the unease became genuine fear. And when the ungodly metallic shrieks echoed from the wings, followed by the deathly silence of the engines, fear became pure, undiluted terror. Julian Croft, the titan of industry, was utterly and completely powerless. His money meant nothing here. His influence was a joke. His power to hire and fire, to make or break lives, was less than zero. He was just a man in an expensive suit, strapped into a chair that was plummeting toward a dark, icy ocean. The facade of control, which he had spent a lifetime constructing, shattered into a million pieces. Panic, cold and sharp, seized him. He fumbled for his phone, a useless gesture. He thought of his ex-wife, whom he'd cheated on and then crushed in the divorce settlement. He thought of his son, a young man who looked at him not with admiration, but with a mixture of fear and disdain. He hadn't spoken to him in over a year. He thought of the family he was about to destroy with his merger, the generations of labor and love he was treating as a line item on a balance sheet. His life, which he had believed was a monument to his own genius, suddenly looked like a hollow, empty shell. A series of transactions, each one leeching a little more of his soul away. The screams of the other passengers were a soundtrack to his internal collapse. This was it. This was the end. And there would be no legacy, only a footnote in a business journal. And a son who would likely feel relieved. The darkness around him felt like a judgment. He was going to die alone, unloved and unforgiven. And then, over the cacophony, he heard it. A voice. Not from the cockpit, but from the economy cabin behind him. It was an old woman's voice, strong and clear, reciting something in Latin. Salve Regina, Mater Misericordiae. He didn't understand the words, but the tone was not one of panic. It was one of profound, unshakable faith. It was a tone he had never used in his entire life. It broke him. The tears came then, hot and shameful. He, Julian Croft, who never apologized, never begged, never showed weakness, began to sob. He clawed at the cross around his neck, a solid gold, tasteful piece of jewelry he wore for fashion, not faith. He clutched it now as if it were a lifeline. "I'm sorry," he whispered, the words foreign on his tongue. "I'm so sorry." He didn't know who he was apologizing to. God? The people he'd ruined? His family? Himself? It was a blanket apology for a life lived wrong. He remembered a prayer from his childhood, forced upon him at a boarding school he'd hated. The words surfaced from a deep, locked vault of memory. "Hail Mary, full of grace," he choked out, his voice a ragged whisper. "The Lord is with thee." Another tremendous shudder rocked the plane. He squeezed his eyes shut. "Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus." He thought of the son he'd ignored, and for the first time saw him not as a disappointment, but as a fruit of his own womb, a blessing he had thrown away. "Holy Mary, Mother of God," he prayed, the words coming faster, more desperate. "Pray for us sinners now." The plane felt like it was tearing itself apart. "And at the hour of our death. Amen." As he finished the prayer, an incredible silence descended. The shaking stopped. The roaring wind ceased. The sudden quiet was more shocking than the noise had been. Julian opened his eyes. The cabin was still dark, but a strange, ethereal light was filtering through the windows. He turned his head and looked out. There, just beyond the wing, she stood. Not stood, was. A figure of light and peace, hovering in the air where there should have been nothing but falling rain and cloud. She was beautiful in a way that pierced his heart, not with desire, but with a sorrow so profound it felt like cleansing. Her gaze seemed to look directly at him, through him, seeing every dishonest deal, every cruel word, every missed opportunity for love. And in her eyes he did not see judgment. He saw mercy. He saw a sorrow for the path he had chosen, and an infinite, aching love that offered a chance even now for redemption. It was a look that undid him completely. At that moment, a low hum began to vibrate through the airframe. It grew in intensity, a beautiful, mechanical sound. On the wing, the dead, dark engine coughed, a flicker of flame. Then it caught, spinning to life with a powerful, steady roar. A moment later, the second engine followed suit. The cockpit lights flickered back on. The cabin lights slowly brightened. A collective, stunned gasp of relief swept through the plane, followed by weeping and disbelieving laughter. The plane leveled out. The captain's voice came over the intercom, cracked with emotion. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. It appears we have power restored. We are going to be okay. We are heading to Boston." Julian Croft sat frozen in his seat, tears still streaming down his face. He looked out the window. The figure was gone. The sky was clear, dotted with stars. Below, the lights of the New England coast sparkled, a beautiful, welcoming sight. He looked down at his hand, still clutching the gold cross. It felt different now, it felt real. He made a promise then, not to a God he feared, but to a mother who had shown him mercy. He would call his son the moment they landed. He would stop the merger. He would try, however late, to build something that wasn't just profitable, but good. The plane landed with a gentle sigh of tires on tarmac, so normal it was itself a miracle. As it taxied to the gate, surrounded by emergency vehicles that were now a precaution rather than a necessity, a deep, holy silence settled over the passengers. They had looked into the abyss and had been pulled back by a hand from heaven. The stories of Captain Rourke, Eleanor Pardo, and Julian Croft were later shared in hushed tones, first among themselves, then with investigators, and finally with the world. Their accounts, though individually unique, aligned in their description of a presence of profound peace and a miracle that defied all mechanical explanation. The official report listed the event as an unprecedented dual-engine failure, followed by an unexplained restart, attributed to a complex combination of factors. But for those on board Flight 477, there was no complexity. Only a simple, breathtaking truth. They had been saved, not by chance but by grace. They had been given a second chance, a story they would carry for the rest of their days, a reminder that even in our darkest hour, we are never beyond the reach of mercy. Thank you for listening to this incredible account. If this story touched you, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories that explore the profound and the miraculous.